Here's the last commandment. Thou shalt play golf. Okay, we got that out of the way, right? In the email, I think I guess I ought to tell you what happened while I was in the hospital. Somebody told me I ought to do that. So for those of you who don't know, for some reason or another, my brain went haywire. I had an unbelievable migraine. I have a new appreciation for people who suffer with those unbelievable pain, and it threw my blood pressure all over the place. It was low, sky high. It took about 8 days in the hospital to get all that straightened out. Good news is they tested everything imaginable, including a spinal tap. That's a lot of fun. And I'm actually in good health. My blood pressure doctor summed it up yesterday. You have hypertension, otherwise you're in perfect health. So that's it. And the blood pressure is stable. Hopefully I won't have any more migraines. And I really do appreciate the prayers, the visits. And if you happen to visit and I didn't know it, it was because I was on pain medication. Okay. In the email I sent out Wednesday, I had a short question. You remember what it was? Apparently don't read your emails. What do you want? What do you want? I don't know if you ever gave any thought to that. I discovered something, it's a little embarrassing, but I can tell you anyway. It's nothing immoral, it's just a little embarrassing. I discovered something this past Wednesday that I wanted and didn't even know I wanted it. Several of us at the office were out riding around with our real estate broker looking for new office space. We've got to relocate our offices next April, so we started the process, and we were riding around in his car. And it's a Mercedes. But it's 2002 model. Probably has close to 100,000 miles on it. I think he just said it did. And I began to sit there and think about my car. My car is 5 years newer, has about 23,000 miles on it. It's a 2007 Sonata. It's a good car. Works great. For some reason, it just didn't quite measure up to that Mercedes. And I was sitting in the back, I'm relaxed, riding around, looking at properties. And as I began to notice, this thing's a little smoother than mine. It's how quiet it was. Unbelievable. My car was good, but it just wasn't quite good enough. For only a moment, though. And for that moment, I'm serious, I thought about maybe I ought to trade mine in for one of these. I could get a 2002 Mercedes. That was just before the agent said his oil changes cost $300. So I'm not going to be trading for a 2002 Mercedes or any other kind of car. But I do have to confess, the idea had more than just a little appeal to me. In reality, we've heard the saying, the grass is greener on the other side, blah, blah, blah. In reality, sometimes the grass is greener. It probably is a better car than mine. I'm sure it is. But here's the point, the thing that struck me about that. Climbing the fence to get there was going to prove costly. Probably in more ways than one, because if I told my wife that I was buying a different car, she'd say, no, you're not, and that would start another battle. So I'm smart. I'm smart. I don't do that kind of thing. But the point is, I wanted it, just for a moment. Let's open the scriptures to Exodus 20. It's verse 17. It is the last of the 10 commandments, the last ones of the commandments we call the 10 commandments. And at least I found this week, as I prepared for this, that it hits us right where we live in a very good way. Hits us in a practical way. And this commandment, just like the others, the 9 preceding it, actually is more than just a rule. One of the things that's really impressed me in our study of this is that every one of these commandments actually serve to create a social order for the Jews. Remember, they're coming out of Egypt. They got no social order other than what they were used to as slaves. And you don't need a lot of order when you're a slave. And it wasn't going to work for a nation of nearly 2 million people at that time, I think. So God's He's not just laying down some rules and being arbitrary and saying you can't do all this stuff. He's creating social order for them, as well as establishing what is righteous. It's both spiritual and practical. And today's commandment, the 10th one, in my view anyway, sets up social, economic, and importantly, and this is where I want to focus, relational boundaries that, at least to me, are as relevant today as they were when they were given. And we're going to see that here in a few minutes. So let's read this. It's very short. It says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife." That'll get you in trouble. "You shall not covet," if you will, "or his manservant, his maidservant, his ox or donkey." And then he just says, "or anything your neighbor has." Anything that belongs to your neighbor. Don't covet it. Now, the question is, and I want to be sure we're on the same page, what does it mean to covet something? What does it mean? So let's kick that around. This is not rhetorical. When you think about coveting something, what does it mean? Desire. Wish you had.
Strong desire.
Like, I want this Mercedes. Okay.
The message says, don't set your heart on anything that is your neighbor.
Okay.
The evil motivation.
Yeah. That. Pardon?
I wish the desire was jealousy.
Yeah. That would.
You want it for a long reason.
Almost because, like my real estate broker, he has one, I want one. So it's more than just wanting. Because I'll give you an example here. Have you ever driven down Mount Perrin Road? Anybody live on Mount Perrin Road here? Anybody know where Mount Perrin Road? You live on it? Oh, yeah. If you haven't, think of a road you've been on where the houses. My wife calls them single-family motels. I mean, they're just, yeah, they are. Unbelievable houses. Huh?
You seen that one at Northside in Mount Vernon?
Not.
It looks like a college dorm.
Yeah. Well, that's an example of it. Here's something. I used to drive that road every day to go to work. I lived in Cobb County, and I'd cut through to stay off 285. And as I drive down there, and Claudia and I have done this too when we've driven it together, I would say, wonder what it's like to live in one of those things. And some of them are probably occupied by 2 people. Or even if you've got 4 kids, 6 people, and you got 20,000 square feet or whatever it is. I'd say, what is it like to live in them? Or maybe if you don't live in one, what's it like to have the money you could buy one? 20% down payment is pretty hefty, right?
Tiger Woods just put down a $5.5 million mortgage.
There you go. I don't know, I can't relate to that. But you know something that struck, the reason I bring this up, not once in all of those trips up and down.
55 million,
What?
sorry.
Yeah,
Order magnitude of.
55 million?
That was to pay
million.
off his wife in the divorce, though.
Yes.
So you've got to get understood.
Well, whatever the range, I mean, some of them with $2 million is enough for me. I don't know about you guys. But here's what struck me as interesting, and I got to thinking about it. Not once in all those trips up and down that road did I ever covet one of those homes. Not once. Would I take one if somebody gave me one? Sure. Probably. I'd sell it and do something with the money. But I never coveted one. I never said, boy, I got to get me one of those houses. And I wondered about that because Wednesday, in less than an hour, I coveted a Mercedes that was 8 years old. I said, what's the difference? You know what it is? It hit me like, it was like one of those revelatory kind of things you get. It hit me, the difference was I have a relationship with that real estate broker and I don't have one with any of those homeowners. That was the difference. I don't know who lives in any of those houses, don't care. I'm glad they got them. But I know that real estate broker. That's why this commandment says, this is very important for us to get, I think. That's why the commandment says, don't covet your neighbor's wife or property. You know what the Hebrew word means? That literally, that's translated as neighbor. Brother, literally or figuratively. Companion, that could be our wives, by the way. Or friend. Similar to, I think, Tom, you talked about it last week. It's an associate, I think you said in the verse that you were covering. Here it means a companion, a brother, or a friend. Here's why this commandment's so important. The 10 Commandments to me for so long have just been rules. I mean, I understand it, I get it, I know they're God's rules and you should obey them. But this is so practical. Listen to this. Think about coveting, evil, and I think, Michael, you said jealousy. You add that into wanting something. what does it do to your view of the person who has it? You begin to see them differently, don't you? Even if it's just a little bit, just a little different. I begin to think that broker friend, he's got more money than I do. He can afford this. It began to subtly change how I saw him. It doesn't affect one whit how I see those people living in those big homes. The reason this is so important for is when we begin to covet, using our definition here, we begin to think that things aren't quite fair or equitable. We might not think it's terribly unfair and inequitable, just a little. And if you recall, in the garden scene in Genesis, the suggestion was subtle, wasn't it? God knows you will, and all of a sudden Eve's coveting, if you will, knowledge of good and evil. Very subtle. But there is a relationship. When there is relationship involved, it changes how we see the other person. These recently emancipated Jews, there's a whole crowd of them, with no social structures, other than what they came out of Egypt with, needed something that would create boundaries, and in this case it's relational primarily, and the 10th commandment does that. And they would need these actually to survive as a nation, because what would happen if they start coveting each other's stuff, including each other's wives? And it begins to change how they see each other. And pretty soon, I look at Tom and I say, you got something, I want it. The relationships start breaking down, and the nation would not survive. You see, families don't survive when relationships break down. Communities don't survive when they break down. Neither do nations survive when they break down. So this is more than just a rule saying you can't do this, you can't do that. This is actually a safety net for the Jews that would create boundaries that were appropriate to and would help them survive as a nation. There's safety nets. They couldn't afford to covet because they couldn't afford to lose each other, and neither can we. Today, it's very relevant. Let me give you an example. A Pennsylvania guy back in 1988, one of these lottery stories, a guy named William Post won about $16 million in the Pennsylvania lottery, and it didn't take very long, and he ended up having only Social Security to live on. And it wasn't that he was such a spendthrift. He made a few mistakes, he says. It was very interesting, his siblings, his brother, one of them, his companion, that ruined him through coveting. Former girlfriend he had successfully sued him for a share of his winnings, so all of a sudden he's down a few grand, a few mil. A brother, a literal brother, his physical brother, hired a hitman to kill him so he could inherit some of the money. Other siblings pestered the guy until he would invest some money in a restaurant business and a car dealership in Sarasota, Florida. Neither venture produced any return for the guy, and it ruined the relationships. I think he didn't say this, but I imagine the day old Mr. Post won the $16 million, he said, I'm in hog heaven, I have got it made. And he might have, at least materially, had his companion, his brothers, his siblings not coveted that money. It broke the relationships. It broke it really bad with his brothers, saw him differently enough to want to kill him. All through coveting. So I want to ask this again. I asked the question, it's rhetorical, but something to think about. What do you have, or what don't you have, excuse me, that your brother, either literally, I've got a brother, anybody got brothers? Yeah, okay, I got a brother. Your brother, either literally or figuratively, companion, again, could be your wife, or your friend does have. What is it? Who's that person? And by the way, it doesn't have to be material stuff. We can covet success, status, prestige, good looks, whatever you want to. The list is endless. The object of the coveting is really not the point, it's the coveting.